One of the main issues with healthy living these days has a lot to do with discipline. And it's not that people are unwilling to develop and build the inner resolve, the consistent practice and the discipline that's required to live a healthy life, specifically, starting with the physical body. I know it's not that people don't want to do it. It's that there are several reasons, one of them being the lack of support systems in place to uphold such decisions. Meaning, the structure of most environments, and I've seen it in several places that I've been to, in China, Taiwan, Macau, in Russia, in Canada, in Mexico, the incentives are stacked against healthy living. What I mean by that is that structurally, societally, the rules, the zeitgeist, the spirit of the times, what is normal, statistically most frequent, meaning the information that people have to draw from, that their behaviors are influenced from, the programming, the influencing, the training, the conditioning, the hypnosis, is completely imbalanced in favor of unhealthy habits, mostly out of convenience. And so when the convenient options are so easily attainable with very little friction at all, so there's hardly any resistance, and when you draw people's time and attention away by these strict, oppressive schedules, and the fact that other people are stuck in these schedules and all we have to draw from are what we're seeing around us. And this is, sometimes what happens when you learn something, and I'm very guilty of this, but I became aware of a lot of these negative types of programming, which could be, most people use the term brainwashing. It has a negative connotation, and so when I realized a lot of the brainwashing, there's this self-righteous tendency, and maybe other people, people will hear this and say, "Well, that's not me," but I'm saying it was me. You have a tendency to look at other people with disdain and disgust and think, how could you be so stupid? And believe these things and fall for that stuff. But it's like how I had to realize how uneducated I was becoming an adult, because I simply didn't have the representation and the role models to guide me into the experiences and education that was necessary for me to have more options, to be able to recognize opportunities. My mother only has a little bit of college, my father no more than a 6th grade education, and although I did learn a lot of things that were good for both of them, I learned to be resourceful from my father, to read a lot, which is what he did, and I don't know if that was him making up for not going very far in school, but he's constantly reading, and and he's very handy. He's mechanical, he's electrical, plumbing, like all that. The handyman. My mother was a hard worker for the most part. She, worked very long hours. She worked in the medical field and nursing, and so there were a lot of things that I learned from both of them. But what I did not get was the guidance, and I didn't get it either from school counselors or teachers. Nobody. There was nobody who was guiding me to go to college, university. No one at all. Not even people that were close around me, which, sometimes it makes me question whether or not these people were my friends, because a lot of them themselves went on to go to college. But I think that a lot of people assume, just like, again, this is the point I'm making about this, a lot of people assume that your parents are telling them the same things that their parents are, whereas some people, I know a lot of people, even some girlfriends of mine, who they went off to college, got bachelor's degrees, all this other stuff. But it was never even in my mind until years after I graduated from high school. Fortunately, not too many years afterwards. I started working in film and TV, and I was working as an extra on this movie called Any Given Sunday, and I met some students from the School of Communications, which is which contains the film school, for film, TV, and things like that at the University of Miami. And so I got around that environment and started to see, for one thing, what a very party life colleges and universities can be. I mean, University of Miami is a huge school. It's a beautiful campus. There was a whole lot of partying going on, but there was also a whole lot of education. The campus is beautiful. I got to sit in, and one guy called me a mystery auditor, was one of the friends that I was introduced to through my girlfriend. And that's really when I got the educational bug. But at the same time, I wasn't making very much time to enroll in courses, because very soon after I got involved with the students at the University of Miami, I just as soon started interning and then getting paid to work on music videos and TV shows and like really huge major productions for major celebrities. And so I didn't bother with school. I mean, and there were a lot of good things that came out of that. I realized how apprenticeship and mentoring and, on the job training and being an independent contractor, how I learned all about that. And so I was earning money in film and TV, working behind the scenes in the art department and special effects, working with props. And even to the point where those very same friends, there was a core group of 4 of us. It was myself, my girlfriend, and 2 other friends. One guy, Chris, one guy, Kevin. Unfortunately, Chris, things didn't work out with him. He, went to a different path. Kevin, still keeping in touch with him from time to time, and he's a really great guy. He has been a huge inspiration in my life, has helped me and supported me in so many different ways. He's done things that he never had to do, and I will be, I'm always thankful for him for that. But to the point where those friends, I actually was able to make recommendations and get them hired on film and TV sets that I was working on for things like MTV and VH1 when they were big at the time, doing music and music videos for other artists and things like that. And so that was one thing that I learned from that, was the whole on-the-job training, and how sometimes in some industries, specifically the entertainment industry, that unless you're working as an accountant or something like that, or you need skills in certain things that require certain degrees in licensing, you can get on-the-job training through a mentor and get to work without having the school behind it. Meanwhile, they were going to school for 4 years to get bachelor's degrees, and I was already working. And getting them hooked up and making connections. So I think I met them around 90, 98, 99, right when they were first starting, when they were freshmen. And I've known them all the way through until at the end of 2002, when we moved to California to continue work in the film and TV industry. So I think it was maybe a little bit less than that. I think I might have met them in 99, something. Yeah, probably around there, maybe. But either way, there were a couple of years I knew them, but I went a little bit off here. But the whole point is that when I started, I was saying about how I realized how difficult it is to be disciplined, and how so many things around us can distract us and structurally create barriers to living a healthy lifestyle. And so the problem initially, what I was setting up and why I even went into this whole thing about, mentorship and on-the-job training, is because I had to do that. It took a lot to do that. And it's very similar when it comes to healthy living, when it comes to nutrition, when it comes to exercise. That stuff is not taught to people very directly or very efficiently or effectively, or else more people would be doing it. That would be the norm. So that was my point, really, and I just went off on a little nostalgia, but it's a good point to realize it took a lot of me just diving in and doing it and getting my hands on in the film and TV industry, and a lot of people don't have that. I ended up finding mentors and getting the guidance I needed in on-the-job training, and then fortunately, those friends that I met at the University of Miami, basically took me under their wing. They let me, audit classes with them. They, if it wasn't for them, I wouldn't have realized what the university life was like. And so I had to, I kind of got adopted by other people and were mentored by them in a certain way. But then I springboarded past them in a certain aspect. Whereas, even nowadays, one of them is hardly doing anything. Another one is working in a completely different industry. Another one is an associate professor at a university, and so on and so forth. Other people that I've met that I still keep in touch with them, one is an author and a speaker, but not doing anything that was directly related to his initial, education at the University of Miami. Another one, I don't even know what she's doing, but she's attempting to be a life coach. So there's a lot of people. Another one, it's on and on. There's a lot of people that I met, and there are a lot of people by extension and just that I met. I've met other people in different departments, and, one of them's working for NASA, and, so they're, but it took a lot for me to get to that, and even to the point where I didn't even first enroll in any college at all until 2004. Now, mind you, I graduated from high school in 1996, and a year late, by the way, because I dropped out of school for a year. So I would have, graduated at 17 in 1995, but I graduated from high school a year late. At 17, had to go to summer school to get basic math and science classes, like earth science and like pre-algebra, or not even that. Like that's how boot is the old term my education was. And so then, I get out, and it wasn't until 2004, which is a whole 8 years later, before I even started thinking about college. And I found the Hypnosis Motivation Institute and got a professional degree. Fortunately, the Hypnosis Motivation Institute was a good step in the right direction, because it's a school that's recognized by the Department of Education. You can find them at hypnosis.edu. They're the first nationally accredited college of hypnosis. So thankfully, it was at least that step in the door. And then, I started taking some community college classes after that, and then I went to the University of Metaphysical Sciences, which is outside of the mainstream school system. But it was in large part because of that experience with them in the film and TV industry that I even started thinking about it. And whereas a lot of my friends and other people I were going off to school, and nobody told me anything about it. No one encouraged me. No one asked me what I wanted to study. I think that people must have assumed because I was an athlete and a the vocalist for a death metal band, that I maybe didn't have any aspirations like that. But I just didn't have the guidance. It wasn't part of my environment. It wasn't something that people were talking to me about. Everything that people were talking to me about was just hooking up with girls, and and a lot of that was being thrown at me being a martial artist and competing in amateur competitions where there were thousands of people surrounding me, and being on stage with heavy metal bands and going to shows, and that's what my life was. I wasn't thinking about any type of higher education, and it wasn't until that experience with meeting people at the University of Miami then any of that came to mind. Okay, so the whole point really is that, and I've made this point, and I'm going to shut this down now, but I'll land this plane here, that the point is that it's the same what I've experienced and what I recognize in society in general is this is the problem, that people don't have the proper guidance. We hear a lot of stuff, but there are also a lot of swindlers and a lot of, grifters, and people who are selling people a whole lot of nonsense, and it doesn't work, and it sets up a cognitive dissonance in people. And I get why these people are doing it. The economy in the world is horrible in a lot of ways for a lot of people, and the only way that people are going to make it, or so they feel like it, is to get money really fast, and they don't care if it really hurts other people, or they're just more thinking about themselves and their family. And you'll notice this when you see a lot of these people selling these diets, these supplements, all of these different types of remedies. And superficially, you might see some people with muscles and they might have abs and things like that, but that's not a measure of actual health. Function is greater than form. You should be focusing on function over form, how you move, how you feel, how you sleep, your overall experience, and what could be summed up as your quality of life. But people are being sold superficiality. They're being sold the bodybuilder workout. They're being sold the workout splits of chest and tries and back and bis and legs, and then abs and cardio workout, which is better than doing nothing, but is not being athletic. It's not full mobility. It's not the full awareness of your body. It's not good nutrition. It's just body sculpting by exercising certain parts of the body to make them form and look in a certain way, rather than so that they function fully through all of the ranges of motions with flexibility, speed, endurance, so on and so forth. That's not what's being focused on. So you'll see people selling this, yeah, you can look like this, but they're not talking about and not showing what you can feel. That's why you hardly ever see any of these people who are selling these products, why you hardly ever see them climbing, running, jumping, flipping, spinning, crawling, squatting. You just see them doing bodybuilder style workouts in the gym, moving around weights, which people will push back on me on this, but most of that stuff is rehabilitative. Those kind of things are not fully functional. And people try to talk about, functional exercise, this and that. Look, real functional exercise, if you want to see what a real functional exercise is, look at capoeira. Look at African Brazilian capoeira. Look at Kalinda in Trinidad. Look at 52 blocks or jailhouse rock. Look at full body exercises and martial arts in general, where and MMA even, right? Wrestling, Muay Thai. And even though a lot of things have their drawbacks and setbacks, but it's the use of your entire body. And again, those all have their drawbacks in the same way that bodybuilding does, because a lot of people over specialize. And so you have people doing crash diets and dehydration and trying to make weight, and and then they have off season, and so they're partying and drinking and intoxicating themselves in various different ways when they're not in competition. So everything has its drawbacks, but the whole point to focus on in understanding is that you need a different perspective. And I have found that perspective for myself from being aware and from not wanting and not being able to serve both a toxic life and a healthy life. It just became impossible for me to do all those things that I was talking about, the jumping, running, climbing, flipping, spinning, all that stuff, and then live a toxic life. It just doesn't happen. I can't be at my full potential if I'm doing those things. And that has become my mission. You know, in 2007, a year after I went online with hypnoathletics.com, which has now been online for 20 years, exercisingyourmind.com went online with the title Wealth Attraction Research, and that great health is the truest of all wealth. And that has been the mission, and what I'm striving for. And it's that awareness, that understanding, that has led me to the realization that I've come to now, which is that people simply need to be guided in the right direction and basically steered away from a lot of the deceptive nonsense that has nothing really to do with actual health, wellness, and quality of life, and has more to do with this grifting that is just set out to get people's money and sell them a superficial external appearance to please other people and make people and give the appearance of actually being successful, while actually simply just being a mask that people are putting on. And it doesn't serve longevity, it doesn't serve actual health and overall wellness. So, but this is where I have been working in healthy living and self-defense. And as a matter of fact, healthy living is a form of self-defense against a lot of the nonsense that people will encounter. And that's what the whole thing about hypnoathletics and exercising your mind are about. Hypnoathletics is exercising your mind towards universal harmony and spiritual wisdom through healthy living and self-defense. And it's the underlying philosophy of that is what is necessary to understand a true path to sustainable quality of life, a highly effective and sustainable quality of life. I'm Hakeem Ali-Bocas Alexander.